And so on today's chat, we are going to be chatting about, what are we going to be chatting about, Andrew?
Do you want to introduce yourself?
No. My name, you don't know who I am. My name is Eddy.
We have to talk about our ages. I'm kidding. Hi, I'm Andi. And we're not really sure what we're doing here, but
we're doing it.
Yeah.
We're doing it.
So I guess we just thought it would be interesting to come together and talk, because we just have interesting conversations in general.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of opinions about things, and
we're both very opinionated.
We thought, might as well just record it. You never know who might be interested in hearing our point of view.
Yeah,
maybe no one, maybe a couple people. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I will add to that. I think maybe we have a somewhat unique perspective on a lot of things. I think one of the things that I'm interested in just talking to you in general about is just, I guess, pop culture.
My favorite. Truly my favorite thing.
I think in general, we're just both very interested in pop culture. Mm-hmm. So we thought, why don't we bring you guys into our conversations?
Yeah. Hopefully you enjoy.
So I know there's a lot more we can say to introduce ourselves, but since the first topic is labels, I think there's actually a lot people will know about us by us just talking about the topic, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that, people naturally tend to want to be part of a team almost, right? And so that's what that label does. It's like you're not on this team and you identify with this group of people and you get that feeling of togetherness. So I think a lot of people identify with labels on purpose to feel like they belong to something.
Right. Is it camaraderie? Is that the word?
Camaraderie. There you go.
How do you say that?
We are educated.
Right. And I think excuse me. Yeah, and I think we just live at it's a very interesting time that we currently live in. I think where labels are a really big thing, like more than ever. Mm-hmm. Like you always hear it. Everybody's always like, I identify as insert this. Mm-hmm. And so I think labels can clearly be, there's a practical side of labels where they can be helpful. But let's just go through some of these and see if all of them are positive for us. Mm-hmm. Do we identify with them?
So
we have a list here.
Yeah, a list of labels that one could potentially identify as or not.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't a comprehensive list of all labels. It's just a list that came to us as we were kind of thinking about this idea.
What is the first one? Actually, so I know what's on the first one, but I think we forgot one. I think number 3 should be the first one we talk, because it's the most simple one.
Right. Okay.
So the first one is male.
Yes. So that is a topic, right? As we understand that gender, it becomes more fluid, and as people kind of express their gender in different ways, what is it to be identified as male? What is it to be identified as male presenting, et cetera, et cetera? I myself identify as a man or a male, but that doesn't mean I don't have a feminine side as well, right? So that's my label that I place on myself, and I also present in a masculine way, and so people then label me as a man when they see me, generally speaking, in the world. How about you?
Okay, so it's a label you accept, but like you said, it's not. You don't think it fully, maybe, describes you, I guess?
Yeah, I think that the historical idea of what a man is may not necessarily be what I would identify with. Mm-hmm. And so essentially the definition of what a man is and what a male is kind of, I think, has evolved. And that definition is what I would be more comfortable with versus the classical definition.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so for me, I think I'm fine with the label male. I mean, I guess I do. Well, I guess okay, so some of these labels I think just mean what they mean, and then there's like the societal side of what
Context.
how people feel about them. But in its simplest definition, for me, male, it just means, are you male or female, when we're talking about like those two categories. And so for that one, yeah, I think if you met me, you would pretty much say I'm very much a man. It's inescapable. So I accept that one. But like you, I think, I suppose there's a lot more to me that stretches beyond that one, beyond the societal understanding of what a man is, or the expectations of like
what it is to be a man.
Which I guess that crosses over a little bit to, you said masculine, masculine versus feminine. That's another label.
That's absolutely another label, and especially in the queer communities, that label is something that people often think about and often associate with specifically gay men. Is this idea of femininity, and I think that's fine. I think that one of the things that empowers people who are gay or queer is that we're able to be a bit more fluid between those two things, because there's no expectation. So like these ideas of the heterosexual male, it's like you have to be like gruff and X, Y, and Z, and it's like I feel like that's different when you're gay or queer. People don't. You can just kind of flex a little bit easier between being feminine and masculine, and it can change depending on who you're with or what you're doing, and that's, I think, completely normal. I think I'm both masculine and feminine depending on the situation, depending on what it is I'm doing.
Depending on the day.
Yeah, literally depending on like the speed of the wind of that day. It's just like unclear.
Although I must say, I think I might disagree with you a little bit.
Yeah.
About what you said about in a gay space or a queer space, there's less expectations to perform those two roles. I think I disagree with you about that.
That may be true.
And we can elaborate on this further, but I think maybe in general, conceptually, I think when you come out as gay or something, certainly like in my culture, so my culture is very gendered.
Right.
We're both African, but like we're from different tribes of African culture, but I think they're both equally very gendered. And so gender roles were always like a big thing, and it was always like, well, the men do this and the women do that, and blah blah blah. But I know once people knew about me, it was just kind of like, well, he kind of does whatever.
Yeah, pretty much. Like,
the expectations of that. But I think we can get back to the whole queer community thing when we talk about the label queer itself. But in terms of like we said, in terms of like man and masculine, I think those are roles that we both identify with, but with an understanding that like whatever societal limitations exist with those roles, we kind of veer past them quite a lot. Yeah,
I think absolutely. I think it's like the evolution of what it means to be masculine or feminine based on kind of the ideas that we were brought up with, where it's like, this is masculine, this is feminine. Now it's like, I don't know if I believe it's so parsed out that way. So I absolutely agree.
So the next one is, what's the next label? Oh, okay.
So with that, we can probably shift into...
Actually, can we go to number 2?
Number 2, yeah, okay.
Yeah. I know there's like a whole bunch of stuff about just like being queer specifically, but I do want to just give people like a visual a little bit, because you're probably listening to us. So number 2 is just black. Yeah. Specifically the label black, which I guess this one is a bit simple. Like,
wait, you're black? Oh my god, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, but we are as black as chocolate black, undeniably.
Like African. Okay, so I think I obviously identify with the label black.
Right.
Identify with the label African as well. And what it means to be black, I think, is it's very broad. It's just like if you basically are, dark skinned if you're from the African diaspora, Caribbean, Africa, like a couple of places like that. And what it means to be Black, though, I think changes and evolves and is all encompassing. So I definitely do identify with that label for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I completely identify with that label. If not only biologically, but just like, that is my race, pretty much. That is my culture, Black culture, which is very broad. But completely accept that label. I like it. Identify with it. I don't mind it.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those labels that is inescapable for some people who are Black, right? Like, because there's some people who are Black who you can't tell they're Black from looking at them, right? They look mixed, they're very light skin, whatever. But when you're a dark skinned Black person, it's like people immediately can tell you're Black, and so it's one of those labels that it doesn't make sense not to identify with, because it's like, well, when people first see you, that's they say that you're Black. Like it's just like this is what's going on. So yeah, I definitely identify with the label, and it's like it is what it like. That's like I'm proud of it, and that's here I am.
Yeah, I mean, there's a part. I mean, a lot of people have said this, but there's a part of being a Black person that is just undeniable. Even if you didn't know you were Black, people will let you know you're Black. Just because there's a certain way that people react to Black people, whether it's positive or negative. So it's a label that is unshakable. So you kind of just gotta
take it in, go with the flow.
You gotta love it. So the next one is African.
Yeah. So I think the next label, and that really goes into, like, from Black goes into, African and Canadian. How
African Canadian, African or Canadian,
African Canadian, African American,
right.
So, Andy, what do you kind of identify with from that kind of list of three things: African Canadian and African Canadian?
So African, definitely, and I guess I do identify a little bit with Canadian. So I mean, I immigrated here right after high school, so I guess I lived in my home country for 18 years, and then I lived in Canada, and I just feel like at this point, both places have influenced me so much that I accept the labels, because I think it would give you a clear pre-understanding of like what I'm about and stuff. A lot of, I guess, my values or like the way I am is distinctly related to the places that I've lived. So yeah, I accept those labels.
Yeah, okay. I think that makes sense. I would say for me, I absolutely identify with, although I haven't, I left Africa when I was quite young, and I moved to England and then to Canada when I was quite young. But I still identify with that African label because I definitely see it in my family, and I see, they still try and kind of maintain those traditions, at least some of those traditions. But I absolutely also identify with being Canadian, especially being like a queer African person. It definitely, I would say, is probably easier in Canada, right? Like I don't feel any type of way about being queer. So, whereas, I hear stories and, people in some of the countries where we have come from, where it's like a little bit more difficult to actually live your life in that regard. So I definitely identify with both being African, but then also being Canadian as well.
Right. And of course, to be clear, Africa is not a country, right? It's a whole it's a whole continent.
But I'm from Africa.
But even having said that, it's like, there is, so specifically, I was born in Zimbabwe. Although my lineage is like South African, like I'm from the Zulu tribe. That's where my people.
Hakuna Matata, right? Has anyone ever said that to you? Like when you're like, I'm from Zimbabwe, they're like, oh my god, like.
Well, but I do remember my first, like when in university, like Frosh Week or whatever, like when you're like still like bonding and like, it's like a whole other thing. But like when you start university, everybody is still in that space of like, they just love getting to meet new people and whatever. And I felt like I was a celebrity. I was like, wow.
Africa?
I was like, wow, I've never experienced fame, but I think that was like the closest. I was like, wow, this must be what it feels like. But I just felt like I felt like everybody wanted to know me. They wanted to talk to me. They wanted to be friends with me. And then it was over as soon as it started. Like it was like for that first
it's like
week.
It's like a week and a half until people find like their crew.
Right.
The moment that crew is found, it's like you're done.
Yeah.
You're done.
Like it was just that was it. Like nobody really cared.
Yeah,
anymore.
then they have their circle. Like everyone has your circle, and then you're just like, oh shit! If you don't have a circle by that time,
right?
Good luck. Good luck in university.
So I mean, anyway, and obviously there's more to your Africanness, which is specifically that you are from the country. Were you born there?
Yeah, I was born in Lagos. I was born in Lagos, Nigeria, at an oil company hospital.
Ooh.
Yay, whatever.
You were bred in money.
So that was the whole vibe. It was like, oil and gas, and like that was the whole thing. That's why we moved so much growing up. Right. But that's kind of what brought us to Canada as well, specifically to like the western side of Canada, where they have a little bit more oil going on.
Right.
But yeah, it's definitely part of my heritage is kind of both African and then also being Canadian, because I've spent most of my life in Canada, various different cities in Canada, but in Canada for the majority of my life.
Right. Interesting enough. I mean, I don't want to take a segue, but so every once in a while, some people won't read me as African. Maybe it's because of my accent. Sometimes my accent sounds very African. Sometimes it doesn't, and then so people will assume like I'm Canadian or whatever. But I know suddenly when it's like, I'm not always excited to tell people that I'm African right away, and I'll tell you why. It's not because of shame or anything. It's just more like there's this thing where when people sometimes find out like you're African, like maybe on like a dating site or something, they always feel like they need to show you that they're not ignorant by like telling you some facts,
like random
facts that are most usually incorrect about Africa. A place that most of them have never been to, that really know nothing about. And it's always like, I don't like that. I don't like that whole thing like where I have to, and like, it's not, I don't really judge somebody for not knowing, but it's very awkward when I have to consider telling somebody that they're just incorrect or, just listening to them. I'm just always like, why is everybody trying so hard? I mean, I never pretend to know anything. Like if I'm meeting somebody who's like Asian or whatever, like I never pretend to like know anything about that place. I'll just ask. And so, yeah, that's always interesting. I wonder if a lot of people experience this, but I feel like that is something that I always experience quite a bit.
It's interesting because I think it depends on, you're absolutely right. It depends on how people perceive you and then label you when they first meet you, right? So like, for example, like, me, when I moved here with my family, like we moved here, our family, we moved here when I and my younger brother were quite young, and so our accents vanished. So we essentially don't have any accents. Our accent is like just general North America accent, and so when we meet people, oftentimes people, especially other Nigerian people, they can't tell that I'm from Nigeria because I just sound like I'm from the valley, like you know what I mean? Like it's so that's always interesting. And whenever I tell people who are Nigerian that I am also Nigerian, they're like, that's cute. No, you're not. Like, do you know what I mean? So it's so interesting to see that opposite kind of happen to you, where it's like, oh, you're African. Like, I know everything about Africa. Whereas for me, it's sometimes they're like, you're African. Nice try. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, actually, that's so true. That is one thing where we have very different perspectives on that. Because, like, yeah, I think you sound much less African. You know what I mean? And me, my the accent.
The accent is still there.
Yeah, it just sort of slips in and out. And actually, you know what? We should actually have a whole conversation on code switching.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be very interesting because it's like a whole thing for both of us, and there's just so much there, and we have very interesting opinions about it actually. Okay, so next label.
Next label.
Ooh, the number 4, I think.
Number 4. Okay, yes. So the label of LGBTQIA 2++. So gay, queer, homosexual, you know, whatever, same gender loving, which is a thing too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard that one.
There's a lot of different labels out there, and it's things you think about often as someone who is not necessarily heterosexual. You're like, oh, like where do I identify with? What do I think about that? Personally, I identify with a couple labels in here. So gay, but the label that I actually prefer is queer. So I prefer the label queer because I think there's a certain political understanding with the word queer that's like added into queer versus gay. Oftentimes people can think of gay people in a certain way, but I think the term queer is kind of encompassing of gay people as well as like the politics of being not heterosexual, essentially. Yeah. What about you?
So for me, I probably identify a bit more with just the word gay. Even the word homosexual.
A homosexual is bad.
It's just such a clinical. It feels so clinical.
It does.
I'm a homosexual. I used to really identify with the word queer, but I just feel like that one has been taken over. Like so we can talk a little bit about this, but I feel like there was a time I was like, oh, I just love the word queer because it felt a bit more broad about what being gay meant. But I feel like now it's just so broad. So this comes back to the whole labels thing about like how some labels can be helpful and then like some can be not helpful. I feel like the word queer is now so broad, it's no longer helpful. It's not really helpful in the ways that labels are supposed to be helpful. So, and I'll tell you why. Because I feel like, so in the LGBT, there are some labels that are very helpful. Like there's one we're going to talk about, which specifically relates to like sexual positions. And for me, that's an example of a practical label where it's just like, you just really need to know what it is and you can proceed, after. Right. Like it's helpful, right? And then gay, even though it was a word that I really struggled to say when I was younger, I actually hated the word. The word gay has like a negative thing where like through bullying people.
That's gay.
That's so gay, blah, 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 right? But I feel like queer is just so broad now that I have to say that I'm gay to be clear. You know what I mean?
I see what you're saying.
So I am curious what you think about that. But yeah, I just feel like I still would like to identify with the word queer, but I just feel like queer is just now, it's like an open house for different people who, to me, have all these different experiences and they're exploring, especially people who are quote unquote exploring their sexuality. I think that's all cool. But I think there's a part to being a homosexual that is not about exploring. It's more about like, it's like being black. You're just kind of stuck with it. It's not really a choice. You're really just kind of stuck with it. And it's something you have to just make peace with it, whether or not you love it, because it's unshakable. And but then queer, even though that used to be what queer was, queer to me is, it seems more like a space for a lot of people to just like, try things, blah, blah, blah. And like they blur some of the lines even.
Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying. I think of the term queer as like it's like I always think of it like a flow chart. Like I think of like queer as the first level, then you go down the level and you have things like, homosexual, you have things like, like lesbian, you have things like there's other things in there. So I agree with you where I think queer is it's more inclusive, but that's why I like the term, because even in my own sexuality, it's one of those things where it's like, I want to be allowed the space to have fluid sexuality, and therefore I identify with queer versus being homosexual. Or I still identify with being homosexual as well, but like I identify more with the term queer because it allows for change and it allows for growth and learning about yourself across time, which I appreciate.
Okay. But in your change, your evolution and stuff, do you think you could really, I mean, it's hard to tell, but I still want to know what you think. But do you think you could ever really evolve past the bounds of being a homosexual?
I absolutely think so. Like, I think in terms, and I think it also is in terms of things like, if we talk about relationships versus sex, or we talk about, the physical aspect versus more the emotional aspect, I think that changes, right? Like, I think that having sex with women, I think, is something that I'm interested in. Having a relationship with them may not be,
Really?
right? Yeah, may not be. So I think that that's why I like the term queer, because it's just a little bit more, and it also allows for like other people who don't necessarily identify as men or women, right? Gender queer people, like non-binary people. So I really appreciate that term, because it's more of like a catch-all, and I don't want to say that I'm only necessarily attracted to just people who are male presenting, right? Not always, right? So I think that's why I identify with the term a little bit more.
Wow. I actually never knew that.
Oh, you didn't know that? Wow.
Yeah. I had no idea you had thoughts about dipping your knob.
You're gross and disgusting.
Are you interested in fish?
Please stop. On to our next level. On to the
Okay, you know what? That needs an episode in enough of itself. Yeah, okay. I mean, actually, the way you explained it sort of validates my feelings about it, because that's exactly what I said, which was that I think the word queer pushes against the side of labels that is about practicality, right? Practicality, and like I don't know, it's interesting because in the LGBT, one of the things in general you learn that one of the philosophies I think you learn, which is really great, is that you don't have to exist in boxes, right? And you don't have to be confined to the borders of a label,
Right.
Also,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
But I also feel like a huge part in our journey as gay people, homosexuals, whatever, is even being able to be comfortable with the label of gay. Like, a lot of us, well, not me, but a lot of people, they go through this thing of like, well, I'm bi, I'm whatever. Right. And I'm not saying they're not bi, but I'm saying there are people who think they're bi, who are gay, who they're sort of working to just like be able,
uncover them.
To accept that, to really know themselves and what they're about. And so, then that's when I think like maybe queer is that broad term that brings us all together.
Yeah, and that's why I appreciate that. I know, and I think we're saying the same thing, because you're saying that basically it's like the catch-all phrase, which is why you dislike it, but that's why I like it, right? Like we're essentially saying exactly the same thing about the term, about the label queer.
Okay, cool. So moving deeper. Yeah. What's the next label?
The next label we can go through is number 8, maybe?
Number 8, yeah.
Okay, let's go through number 8. So we are going to talk about actually a couple labels at once right now. So top, bottom, versatile, as well as the idea of dominant and submissive.
Oh, yes. Actually, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much.
There's a lot more. There's a lot of nuance.
There's a lot of nuance in that. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so do you want to start? Which one do you identify with?
What's that? I've never heard of these terms before. So I identify with being a top verse. Like, I think that's the currently, in terms of like sexual position, that would be what I identify with. In terms of the idea of dominant submissive, I identify with being a switch, which is someone who's able to do both depending on what the situation is and what the other person is what the energy is. I like the ability to, try it all. Open to trying everything at least once, right? So I think that's why for me, I don't want to force myself into like I'm only like this or I'm only like this. It just really depends on what I want that day, basically.
Right. Okay. So I identify with I guess mostly bottom. When it comes to dominant submissive, I really hate those. I hate those two words. I hate those labels. So those are two labels I just think are nonsensical. I think they're impractical and they just don't make sense.
Really? Why?
Yeah, and I'll explain to you why. So I think people use them as if they're supposed to be practical, like, oh, are you submissive or are you a bottom, or are you submissive or you're dominant or whatever. But I just think they don't really make sense to what you're actually asking. I think when people are asking that, sometimes they're just asking, are you a top or a bottom? But maybe I'm just getting hung up on the details. I am a bit of a stickler for
details.
Yeah, for details. But it's just, I feel like even though I bottom and should be submissive, I'm just so not submissive. I'm just very dominant, actually. In fact, most of my exes have always told me that I'm very dominant. And actually, I think you really hit the nail on it, which is, I think dominance and submissiveness, I think that's on a spectrum. And I think all of us, whether we're topping or we're bottoming, I think you can be either or, depending on your mood. I just think it really doesn't apply. But the reason I have such strong feelings, such negative feelings about it, is I think a lot of people approach sex with the dominant submissive thing in mind in a way that is not really good for the sex part. Right. Let me elaborate and stop speaking in circles. But so in my experience, I feel like just because of my sexual position, I've often met a lot of men who expect me to have a very submissive type of personality. And because I'm not, in fact, I actually feel, one label that I really, really love, that I take ownership of, is alpha.
Oh, alpha, yeah.
Yeah.
Alpha, I love that.
I like that one. Alpha, beta. Are you a beta? Are you a beta or an alpha?
Please never call anyone a beta. I'm like, whoa,
but I just feel like, that's where, like, I think a label can be sort of destructive. Is it sort of puts someone in this sort of mindset to have certain expectations. Right. And in general, I think, when we end this, we're just going to talk about labels in general. But I think it's like there's certain stereotypes that are attached to certain labels. And so when it comes to like submissive, dominant or whatever, and I think a lot of people who've bottomed have experienced this, is interacting with somebody who just expects you to be submissive. And then you pretty soon just end up in a power struggle.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I just don't think that label really works. I'm not sure why we use it, because again, I feel like more than anything else, that behavior is on a spectrum. And I think we all just veer from one side to the other, depending whether it's a sexual situation or whatever.
Yeah.
I
agree. I think the issue is the expectation and the attachment of dominant and submissive to top and bottom. That I've always said this, and I've talked to my friends a lot about this. It's like the expectation that, oh, bottoms are like this and the tops are like this, or like it's like this and like that, and people associate these expectations or these stereotypes essentially with people who identify a certain way, where I just don't think that's necessarily true at all, really. Like I think that you could do whatever you want and then also be however you want at the same time,
right?
And, just because it's not the way that it's shown in the media, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing anything wrong. So,
right.
So I agree.
Do you think people need those two bottom or top? Like, do you think to a certain degree a top needs their bottom to be submissive for them to want to do it or whatever?
I don't really think so. I think I don't think so at all, actually. Yeah, like I literally don't think that at all. I think there are people who bottom, who are dominant, who top, who are submissive. Like I really think it's not. I think it's important to expand the mind past this idea of essentially heteronormativity. Like that's what it is. And basically, what it is you're trying to impress heteronormativity onto gay and queer relationships, which isn't like why? Like, what is the reason for that? So I definitely don't think the bottom needs to be submissive. I don't think the top needs to be dominant. I think anyone could just do whatever they want, whatever is in that moment and turns each of the people on, essentially. Then that's what you should do. Right?
Yeah, because I just think there's a part there's a part about bottoming, because I think it even implies that, like, well, the bottom should just kind of lie there. Which is pretty lazy, if you ask me.
Maybe do something. You better do something, right?
You better work. Wake up,
RuPaul. You better work.
Get involved. So again, yeah, that's wrong. And then also, I think it's oh, I would love to like have another conversation about this, but like, so when you're coming out, and you are, testing the waters of your queerness. A lot of your frame of reference, I think, because a lot of us don't really have mentors. A lot of your frame of reference about things like sex and stuff probably is like pornography, or even, like you said, those heteronormative ideas, right? Yeah. And so even with like bottoming, your assumption, maybe let me say my assumption was that like, oh, I guess this is like the female role, because that's what I used to hear. Like when people used to make negative comments about like gay people or whatever, like in my community, they used to always say like, oh, that's the woman, or they'd always be like, oh, which one is the woman? Which one is the guy or whatever, right?
Which is, and that's in and of itself another situation, because honestly, that is misogyny. Like it's essentially what that is. It's like an active, it's like an example of misogyny where it's like, oh, well, this person's the woman and therefore they're less than. So that's that's an entire other story, but I did want to just mention that because that's what that is.
Right.
Go on.
Yeah. So you end up in a situation where you feel like you can't really speak up, because once you've already taken that in your mind, you've accepted like, I am the submissive. It's like, it sort of takes over your mind. You feel like you should act a certain way. You shouldn't speak up. You shouldn't whatever. And especially for people who bottom a lot, like, you can endure quite a lot of pain just simply because you're not empowered to speak because of labels like that. Right. Again, I think bottom, top, versatile is practical. I personally think dominant, submissive is nonsensical. Like really, I just think it's BS. Like I don't even know if it applies to even straight couples also, because it's like I know so many straight couples where the females have such dominating personalities, but again that like the fact that like they are being penetrated, which is what topping and bottoming is about, right? It has just nothing to do with those two words. Yeah, but I don't think they would ever even claim those two words.
Yeah, but I think that's why they're labels, but they're not necessarily related to each other, because it's like dominance and submissiveness aren't only just sexual. It could be just in like life. Like, so some people are dominant. Like some people are domineering in life, like just how they handle themselves in most situations. So I think the top bottom verse is focused on sex, whereas the idea of dominance and submissiveness, it can have to do with sex, but may not necessarily have to do with sex. So.
Right. So before we wrap this one up, you mentioned one versatile, right? But I guess that's one you identify with.
Yeah. So for our listener, for the 3 listeners who are straight. So what versatile means is that you like to top and you also like to bottom. So generally speaking, if you're a bottom verse, you prefer bottoming, but you can also you also enjoy being verse. But generally speaking, you prefer it. If you're top verse, you prefer topping, but you are also verse. I would identify as a verse person. I think this is the same way I identify as a switch when it comes to dominant and submissive. It's just like, if I like someone, I don't really necessarily want to be hindered by the fact that they're a top or bottom or what. It's just like, okay, well, it's fine. Like, whatever. Like, I like you, it's fine. We'll figure it out, kind of thing. So I think for me, it's definitely more of a mindset where I'm like, I just want to be, again, not hindered in terms of practicality ongoing to make that actually work. But it's just more of like a like a mind frame. Okay, at this point. So yeah, that's how I feel about the verse thing. But I really appreciate verse guys. I think it's great to not to be like open to doing a couple of different things and switching it up, because honestly it can get boring especially if you're with one person for a long time. It's like it's nice to kind of just change things up a little, spice things up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, so we really want to do an episode specifically on just sex, where we like fully just elaborate on these things, on like this whole thing. So yeah, there's a lot more to talk about there.
There's a lot more to talk about. There is a lot more to talk about.
Since we're just talking about labels, I think we're done with that one. So yeah, stick around if you actually want to hear us talk about like sex.
Let's talk about sex, baby. Okay,
So the last set of labels, these are just very much, this is like insider talk, like LGBT insider talk.
It's like for the gays.
Yeah, so some people might not actually know this, but just to set it up a little bit, if you've ever been on Grindr, the gay one,
What?
you can actually, they've expanded the list.
Yeah, but you can basically filter to like literally every single label that exists. So
Yeah.
there's,
Oh, actually, so I'm gonna open it as we talk.
Oh my gosh.
Because they've expanded the list of labels.
Let me see if I
But basically, when you create your profile, there's an option to list. You can choose a label, a body label, I guess.
Right.
And like you said, you can sort of filter search people, so you can find people who are specifically in a certain. So it's called tribes. They call tribes.
Tribes. I remember that. Yeah, tribes.
But I don't know. What do you see? So there's a bunch. I just want to like read
a couple, yeah.
and then we'll see which one we identify with. Oh, okay. Oh my god. It's so long.
Wait, it's like 500. Jeez.
They even added. Okay, they just added weird one. Anyway, so the first one in alphabetical order is bear. The second one is clean cut. They added clean cut. Really?
Is that that's a thing, I guess.
Yeah, that's a daddy.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Discreet. This is weird.
Okay.
So discreet didn't used to be there, but because mainly they were just. Let me just read the body ones, because some of these are completely not related. But it's bear, geek.
Okay.
Which I think
that means you wear glasses.
Yeah, I think I know what they mean by that one. Yeah, jock.
Okay.
Rugged.
Okay.
Oh, they added trans.
Okay, great. Love that.
Twink. And they used to have one like, which one is the one for like big guys?
I feel like Chaser, maybe? I don't know.
They used to have one called Slim.
But yeah, I think, for a couple of people who don't know what some of these things are, a bear is, generally speaking, a bear is a gay man who is a little bit more burly, tends to be hairy. There's a whole subsection of bears under bears.
Sorry, I found it. Sorry. So it's under body type.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so body type is again, like, the fact that this is an entire section that has like 8 different selections is
right.
That's another story. But basically we have here, which is average, large, muscular, slim, stocky, or toned.
Right.
Again, is that necessary? It's unclear.
Yeah. So do you identify with any of these?
Average, like large, like I don't. Do you know what I mean? Like it fluctuates. Like some, it depends on if it's the winter or the summer months. You know, like a normal person, I gain and lose weight depending on the time of the year.
Right.
I shy away from self-identifying with a body type, and especially as someone who has struggled with body image issues, it's just like nah. Right. Like we're good, we're Gucci. I don't want to do all of that. How about you?
Honestly, the same thing you said. I feel like I can literally trace my eating disorder to this.
Like literally.
Like
literally.
Like honestly, the first 18 years of my life growing up in Zimbabwe, I was pretty big. And that was not an issue. Like it was so weird being in a space where that was actually a positive thing. I maybe wanted to lose weight for myself, but certainly my community never really made me feel like it was like an issue. Came to Canada, came out, blah, blah, blah. And then I remember like creating a profile and then seeing this for the first time. And I guess I was like really kind of ignorant to like gay culture and everything. And I was like, well, what is this, right? And this was the first time I started to really think about it. And there was like a period where I felt like I just didn't really know where I fit specifically.
Yeah.
At the time, I think I could have been stocky, or I felt like I was in between slim and stocky at that time. And I just didn't really know where I fit.
Yeah.
And so I just didn't really choose one. But what that then meant was that when people were contacting me on Grindr, they'd always ask me what my body was, or ask me for pictures or whatever. And then there was like a whole thing where I send somebody a picture. They'd always ask for like a bit, like a chest pic or whatever. Then I'd send somebody a picture, and then like
radio silence. Yeah,
Silence
great for that. I'm not great for the confidence.
Yeah, so then I started to. That was the first time I started to think like, oh, I guess this is kind of important. And of course, people would also ask me like, what's your type and everything.
Yeah.
You know, the interesting thing is, it would be a lie to make it seem like I don't really think about these. In terms of like the people who I'm attracted to. I think maybe just the difference is that I can recognize people. I can recognize people being in these different categories, but that not necessarily have that be like, oh, I like them because they're this or whatever. It's like, oh yeah, they're just this.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's not really.
That's not like a limiting factor.
Yeah, that's not really like a limiting. I mean, I am attracted to people's physical characteristics, but it's not this specifically.
Yeah, I definitely know some people who are very much like, you know, only attracted to people who look a very certain way, and that I think is a problem. Well, like to be honest, I think it's odd to be only attracted to a certain type of looking person. Unclear. But yeah, I don't think I wouldn't identify with any of these necessarily myself. If someone were to call me, you know, large or muscular or whatever, that's their opinion of what I'm with. Fine,
right.
But I'm just here. Like I'm just here chilling. Like weird. I don't know what to. So I would say I wouldn't feel comfortable identifying with any of these.
Yeah, honestly, I feel that too. I mean, even though I ticked one here because we're looking at my Grindr, by the way, I'm just like, there's something even. I always feel disingenuous about it. Kind of. I always feel like this is like a setup where I always wonder if it means somebody. Oh, sorry. What we're talking about? We're talking about like we're looking at my Grindr profile, which I haven't opened in months. Like, fuck Grindr. I literally just opened it just so we could see this list, and I highlighted masculine on it. But even like I was telling
muscular,
like I was telling Eddie, is that like. Even from the moment that I ticked it, there was just something about it that gave me a little bit of anxiety to feel like somebody would walk in with certain expectations, like would think like I was really buff or something.
There's so much expectation based around what these things say because they don't allow for interpretation. It's just like when you think of a muscular person, if someone says someone is muscular, you think of a bodybuilder. That's just what your mind.
Yeah, that's what my mind.
But it's like that's not. There are people who are muscular who aren't bodybuilders. Yeah. So what does that kind of mean? So yeah, I would say for number one body type in terms of what's on there, I wouldn't identify with any of those personally.
Yeah.
But then there are other things. If you go past body type and go to what you're attracted to, there are. It's I think you're mentioning there's bears, there's geek, there's jocks, there's daddies, there's twinks. There's literally everything. Like it's just very specific, which can and can't help in my opinion. I think that the fact that it's so
these don't make sense to me either.
Yeah, the fact that it's so compartmentalized just seems like the paradox of choice, where you're just like,
sorry, don't mean to interrupt, but I guess the tribes you can actually pick more than one.
You can. You can
so it's not that you have to just pick one.
Yeah, you can pick several things that you're into. Like people potentially could be into daddies and bears. And also twinks for some reason.
Right.
Or you could be into only one. Funny. But you could only be into one specific thing. Maybe you only like people are a little, on the heavier side. Like that's your vibe. Like you could pick whatever you want in here. Yeah, I find that as I've gotten, as I've aged, as I've gotten older, I feel like I'm less and less concerned about the label that someone identifies with, and only liking people in that label. You know what I mean? When I was younger, I think I was a little bit more like, oh, I only like guys like this, or this is, or I thought I only liked guys in a certain way. But now I'm just like, yeah. Listen, like it just doesn't really. I'm talking to just a vast majority of different people who look completely differently. Like so for me, the labels aren't really helpful. Personally, like I don't really find them useful at all. It's just like, well, if you're attractive, you're attractive, regardless of if you identify as some Venn diagram of like 18,000 different like labels. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting because I think it's that whole thing of like, is it practical? Is it useful? The label. And I think I guess some of them are useful, depending on like. So one says trans, I guess, and so if you want to let it be known that you're completely open to dating trans, or maybe you're specifically looking for a trans person, right? Or then there's one that says clean cut, I guess, because some people really aren't into the hair thing.
I guess, or maybe
so the hair thing, that would be the bear.
Yeah, I guess, but
is bear like body shape?
No, bears can be like.
Bear means hairy, right?
No, bear means like big. Like it means like when you think of bears, you think of like stocky and hairy. It's like a large man kind of thing.
Right.
But you can also have otters, which are just hairy, slim men. You can have.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you because it says otter here.
There's like several. There's like silver wolves.
What's POZ?
Oh, pause. So that means you are HIV positive.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what that means. That's what. So just letting people know.
Oh yeah. So you said then because for me rugged, I thought that was hairy. Well, that's beard. That just means.
I think there's a lot of overlap. The bears tend to be rugged because they have the same like characteristics. I'm not really sure even why that's an entire label of itself, but okay. So again, it's one of those things where. It's a Venn diagram. You a lot of the things overlap, so you can put a bunch of stuff, but I just feel like I just don't see the point unless you are very specific in what you like, which is fine. But like you're like I only like guys who look like this specific thing. Then I guess maybe that those help you filter through the people. But yeah, I don't particularly find it that useful.
So the interesting thing is. Every once in a while I'll talk to different people and they'll be like, wow, why are you guys, meaning gay guys, why are you guys so obsessed with looks? And sometimes I used to also think that like, oh, I guess gay people, were really into like looks or whatever. But sometimes I also think that's not true though. I think everybody's into looks. It's just that gay people are just very transparent. Like we really just say it like it is. Okay, so I grew up with a lot of like straight boys because I went to like an all boys high school specifically, and I've always heard men talk about like, oh, I like women with big breasts specifically, and some men will be like, well, I don't like that. I like small breasts or whatever. And isn't that kind of just like the same thing? It's like. It is the body characteristics that you are specifically attracted to. So anyway, all this to say is I agree. I think to that first point, I think we're all kind of like that. I think maybe it's just with gay people because it's in writing, it just kind of looks ugly. But I also agree with you. I think the problem with some of these, it's just I don't think they really add to the experience of dating at all, because I think there's a part of dating that is about like being surprised. I think sometimes it actually does kind of limit you to the possibility of like learning that you're really into something that you never knew you were into.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with that point. The only counterpoint I would say is that I think that a lot of the time people go on Grindr not to date, but to fuck. And because of that, they're like, well, I already know what I like, and that's just what I want to do right now. So that's where I'd be like, okay, fine. Like if you're just like, I want to get off, and that's what I'm going to do. But I do absolutely agree with you in terms of dating, in terms of like longer term situation. You may not know what you actually like because you've always thought you liked one thing, but it's like you actually like other stuff too. Like, you know what I mean? Like you need to sometimes open yourself up to different experiences and different types of people.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, oh boy. Again, we kind of participate in this too a little bit, but specifically just because we have certain types that we really, really like, right? I think you can sort of see this through our Instagrams. And yeah, I mean, it just is what it is. Like there's certain elements about, I guess, the human body that I think are more attractive, than others. But like I said, I think you made a good point, which is, well, if you're looking for just specifically sex, maybe it is a bit more practical to be like, well, I'm kind of shopping for sex, and so I know what I want, and this is what I'm looking for, right? But yeah, then when it comes to relationships, because it's a lot more emotional, I think maybe some of those labels don't really make sense. But it's a complicated thing because it's practical, but I also feel like it kind of messes with your head a little bit.
I think that the difficulty with, there's a practical use for labels, and this kind of goes into our kind of final point, which is are labels useful? Are they like impactful? Do we like them? There's a practical use for labels, I think, in some instances, right? It can be very practical and help you kind of go through life easier by labeling yourself a certain way, so that you can again identify with that team, right? Like I mentioned at the beginning, like you can identify with that subset or group of people, right? So you can basically show you have similar experiences, similar lived experiences. But there's also a certain part of labels that is essentially like unnecessary, and essentially just causes more spin than not, right? Like there's people who will label themselves in a certain way or expect people who have a certain label to be a certain way, when it's just like, but what does that actually help her life? Like at a certain point, does it actually help for you to assume that a person was like this just because they have that label? Maybe not. So I think it's a double-edged sword. I do think it's useful, but I think that sometimes it goes too far and the labels they weigh us down as opposed to allowing us to be more fluid in our expression.
Right. Were these labels or just labels in general?
Labels in general.
Labels in general. Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think there's a side to it. Well, okay. I mean, as you've heard me say throughout this, I think some labels they're so practical, they're actually helpful. And positive, I guess, even though, one of the things we didn't really talk about, like, I'd love to do a separate video about this, but even with like the label black, one of the things I feel like that has solidified us in our friendship is we both have similar experiences about like going through a period of like, oh, I'm a black person and I don't have black friends. So I need to actively find black friends, right? And having that not work out. Or I'm a gay black person and I need to have gay black friends, and that also not working out.
Like having to find that. And again, when you're that you have that intersectionality of two communities being gay and black, and those communities may not necessarily be aligned in some instances, right? Like it becomes difficult, and then especially when you also then take that and then you're put into when you live in a place that is predominantly white, so we both live in Canada, which is predominantly white, it becomes, you start to feel like the other. You're always like, you always feel like very, very different from everyone else because you're black and then you're gay and then you have the accent and then you have, it's like all these things and you're like, what's, you really start to feel that I'm the other.
I'm different. And that's the thing about like some of these labels is with labels come stereotypes. Whenever you like prescribe a label to somebody, I think you always go into that interaction with certain stereotypes in your mind. And some of them might be true, some of them might be helpful. Yeah. But I think it's the whole thing of like, when you and I try to make friends who were black just because they were black, that didn't work out, because obviously friendship is about chemistry, not about race. You know what I mean? It's just not. And to a certain degree, friendship is not about like sexuality. It's about, again, chemistry. And actually, you know, to like that is the story of like our friendship, is that we had a common friend who literally said to me, "Oh wow, you know, I just think you would get along with my friend." That's what she said to me, and I think she just based it on chemistry. She was just like, "I just think you guys would get along," and we met and we
did.
Yeah, we did, right? The fact that, like, I don't think she said it because we were Black or because we were gay. I think it was just like a personality thing. And I know that to be true because, again, I've tried to specifically intentionally make friends based on superficial things, superficial labels. And every time I tried to manufacture
that's the word.
It never worked out well. In fact, it always bit me in the
That's the word. When you try to manufacture friendship because you're like, well, this person is like me because they fit these labels.
Right.
That's not necessarily true. Just because they happen to be all the same things as you in terms of being gay and Black, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be friends. Like, that doesn't necessarily mean you have, you know, deeper things in common. So
right, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, so at the end of the day, yeah, you know, labels exist. Again, you know, we accept some of them.
And we agree with some of them, and it helps you.
You've heard I reject some. There's some I vehemently reject.
But I think overall, like, labels are useful, and people as they go through the world, they to live in society and to get through things, you when you meet people, you make snap judgments on them based on how they look, what they're saying, how they're talking, and you label them. And that's what your mind does without you realizing it. And it changes the way you interact with them, but it just helps you get through life and helps you get what you want. So to a certain extent, it's useful.
What do you think about, so I know we're wrapping this up, but I did want to ask you, what do you think about, like, spaces for certain labels? Like, so this is a space, this is like a queer space, this is like a lesbian bar, this is like,
I think,
a straight thing or whatever, you know?
I think those spaces are really important, especially for communities that are very small, and especially communities that are very discriminated against and prejudiced and see a lot of prejudice. I think it is really important to have those spaces to be like, for example, I think of only women gyms, like gyms that are, I think those are super important because it's like, you know, people just want to go to the gym to exercise. I don't want to go to the gym and have some random staring at me. Like, I do, but like some people don't. Okay? So I think that it's really important to have these spaces for people who label themselves in certain ways, so they can feel like they can be themselves and not have, you know, the other presence of someone else kind of stopping them from doing that.
Yeah, so I think it's a very controversial thing, clearly, because it's, in a way, it's almost like you support some kind of segregation, whether it be gender segregation or whatever, and people have different feelings about it. But I feel like I agree with you. I think, like, one thing I can specifically point to is when we, in the city that we both met, we used to go to, I guess, the gay village there, and there was like specifically queer spaces.
Right.
But then over time, they were just like open to like the full on public, and it became a thing where you would go to this space and there were non-queer people there. It became so diluted, in my opinion, that it was just no longer a safe space. It was just like a public space. And my issue with that was, like, I just felt like this kind of sucks because, I mean, I know it's like open to all free love or whatever, but it was like, yeah, but like, well, straight people have every other space. This was our space, you know what I mean? But now they're in our space. You know, we had like all these like straight men talking about like, oh, I'm not gay, you know, and it's just like, well, so why are you here?
I
it was very frustrating, you know, because it's like, well, this is one of the few spaces we have
to feel safe.
Yeah, to feel safe. You're in our space, but you know, it just again.
I know what you're saying. I remember those situations where it's like, you know, people would get like angry with you if you asked, if you like tried to dance with them or you asked them if they were gay and they weren't. And it's like, well, TBH, the expectation when you're here is that you're gay. Like that's my that's like modus operandi. Like I assume you're gay until I'm told otherwise.
Right.
So
because of the space that I'm in.
Because we're in the space. So
yeah.
So yeah, I definitely agree with you where it can be. I think those spaces are important, and it's important to have those spaces be mostly for those people.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's an example where I guess some of these labeled spaces can be very useful, and because again, it's a safe space. It's I don't know how to say it. It is like sort of a safe space, but I think that kind of apply because we're living at a time where everybody's all about like inclusivity. Inclusivity is the most important thing. I disagree with that. I think, I just personally just feel like 100% inclusivity is impossible. That's just how I feel. I feel like it's an impossible task, but I think the most you can achieve is, I think it's okay to have segregated spaces for different things, because I think not all communities are safe for different types of people. There's a certain safety that you find in one community. And I think I even know like I have a younger sister. She's a teenager, and her high school established, ever since the George Floyd thing, they established a Black space for them. And she said before that, she said it was just amazing for them to be in this place, the Black students of the school, where they were a minority. And for one, it was like the first time they just spoke about like Black issues within the school, something they had never done before, and realizing that they had like that sort of commonality, that Black experience, right? Now, of course, I don't think that means they're like best friends. Like I said, I think friendship is about like chemistry. Relationships are about like chemistry that transcends things that are superficial, like that. But I think segregated spaces based on labels is fine, like I said, because I think safe spaces are important.
Yeah, I think I agree to a certain extent. I think that if the space is created for the purpose of helping the community the space is created for versus like taking that community away from another community. Do you know what I mean? Like when we think of segregation, you think of like, the Black people can sit here and the white people can sit here. That wasn't to help Black people. Oh, right. Right? So that was so those are two different things. But if a Black person's like, I want to create this Black space for for Black people to talk about their Black experience, that's different than the government being like, well, the Black people can sit here. Like, you know what I mean? So I do think I see what you're saying. I get what you mean in terms of like spaces created for people. I think it just depends on who creates the space and then also like why the space is created.
Yeah. What is the goal that you're trying to achieve?
Yeah. Yeah. So, but overall, I think we're both kind of like aligned in the idea that there are labels. Some are practical, some are impractical. We identify with several labels, and there are several that we don't necessarily identify with currently. But I think those things are also evolving and changing as we get older and time passes.
Cool.
But with that being said, we want to thank you for listening to our first episode. I'm gonna put on announcer voice now.
But yeah, this was fun. Hopefully the first of many.
Hope you find it insightful. Hope you learn something or have some interesting things to talk to your friends about. And tune in next time.
Cheers.
Bye.